Talking about page layout, two things come to mind that are really important. One, the width tag. So we've used a width of 80% on our main wrapper here, and we might want to do something like 960 pixels to be more of a static type layout. And you can see how when we go smaller, we get the horizontal scroll bar that can go back and forth. But this can also be helpful when we get into an adaptive layout. One other thing we can do is we can also, if we want to mix this with a 80% width, we can also mix it with a min width and a max width. And so the minimum width we want this to be seen might be 600 pixels wide, and the max width that we want this to be might be 1200 pixels wide. And what that does is it will say, all right, we're going to keep it at 80%, but when we shove down, our wrapper will never get smaller than 600 pixels wide. And you can see that how it's staying smaller here, and we're losing our margins until we hit that 600 threshold, and then we start growing the content again until we go larger and hit 1200, and then our margins grow much larger than the 20% that they're given. And so we can use this to kind of keep a fluid width kind of in check. Now again, this is not the best approach when we're talking about adaptive and responsive design, and so for your own client projects, probably shouldn't use this, but it is definitely something that we can use to kind of help. The other one I wanted to talk about, and I've used before, is our height tag. And you can see here our height, we have 300, let's make that 400 now. And we can define out how tall our div tag is that is using this image as a background. Now again, you need to understand that this is not an image tag that we're using. This is a div tag that's using a background as an image. Or sorry, as an image as a background. So think of this like if we were to fill it with a blue or something like that. If you don't put a height in here, it's going to collapse in on itself because there's no content inside of this empty div to fill it out. And if I was to go through to that specific tag and say, okay, on that hero image, I'm going to write in test or something like that and save it and refresh it, you can see how test comes in, but that only shows a little bit of the image. And so having a height specified can help with that, and that's why that's important. Now one thing we can do is we can play around with some other types of things. We could play with the percentage, we could play with the pixel amount, we could play with M's and Rems and things like that if we want to see how tall it makes it. But one in particular is the viewport height. And the viewport height is from this pixel down to this pixel. And what I'm going to do here is apply 100 viewport height from there to there, minus 300 pixels, which is roughly that amount right here. And what this does is it allows us so the second we scroll, that image stops. And so if I move this up higher, the second I scroll, that image stops. And so it is basically saying, look at from here to here, minus off that, and that the leftovers is how tall that image should be. And so that will always resize. And this technique is used in like full screen video. When you go to a web page and the image reaches all the way to the bottom, that's how this technique is used. They use a calc to calculate the difference from 100% essentially from there to there, minus off 300 pixels, that amount, and that how the leftovers is the height of the image. But normally I don't like to use that unless I am doing a full screen image, but it's just kind of a cool little trick you can do to get your image to fill out a specific space.